Okay, so today we're going to review the fee.org homework people wrote about. Thank you, everyone who completed it. Everyone got it 90 or 100 or 95. The first thing so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different stories that people chose to write about based on current events and economics. The first one is about the Super Bowl, about the quarterback of the Super Bowl was not the same quarterback of the Super Bowl 20 years ago. And then I guess the top 10 most favorite Super Bowl commercials were not the same firms that were of the Super Bowl 20 years ago. Of course, it's big business. How many people watched the Super Bowl this year? How many? 100 million? How many? How many? 90 million? Oh, one of the lowest, yeah. That's a big scam. There's nobody there. Anyway, right. So the point is that the I guess 10 most popular advertisements were completely different firms 20 years ago as they are today. And what that illustrates is the creative destruction of the market that the market provides for consumers' demands as entrepreneurs try to create value and introduce things that you want to buy. So we can look at that creative destruction in the ideal types we constructed. We have the Keynesian ideal type, which is by far the predominant philosophy of economics prevalent today, where national income is the formula, and then the economy is something that can be guided by experts. The goal is stability, with the state being in the business of jobs creation. Whereas the Hayekian vision is creative destruction and entrepreneurship. Where the state is a burden. Right. So then the question is, why does then creative destruction is what reduces absolute poverty and creates well-being, then why do we have the state doing bailouts, the special interest? So the answer to that is Soule's rule. The first law of economics is that resources are scarce. The first law of politics is to ignore the first law of economics. And the most recent political cycle in the United States costs $15 billion, and that money has to come from somewhere. Where does that money come from? Campaign contributions. It comes from those who receive the bailouts under the new terminology of essential services, as determined by experts, where we end up in a utilitarian society, which is a slippery slope towards authoritarianism. And so one of the advertisements was a currently well-known rock singer from New Jersey, who I used to listen to on 8-track cassettes when I was a teenager. And that person does an ad from the middle of the United States talking about unity the day after that, the now single party in the United States, in Congress and in the administration, passes, not bilaterally, but singularly in the Senate, a stimulus bill that bails out public schools, public school teachers unions, bankrupt blue states, and creating unity. And the same musicians, this is from the New York Times, the hopeful sounds of a new beginning. Music from Lady Gaga and others on Inauguration Day was a balm for a divided nation, even though they're acting under a single party mandate. And there's the musician again performing. And so what this is called from Bourdieu, distinction. Uh, 2010, which was Bourdieu's Distinction, is one of the most well-respected books in sociology. And he calls the idea of art, which perpetuates the ruling class or an elite, he calls that consecration. So you got the musicians, the artists are able to associate with those with a lot of political power. And again, the state has a monopoly on coercion. So the musicians get to associate with the political elite, and then the political elite gets to associate with the musician elite, and then gain a vision, public vision of, I guess, coolness, or being associated with musicians. So it's under Bourdieu distinction, it's an elite class perpetuating itself. Elite class, experts. Okay, and then we also know from the Congressional Budget Office that the stimulus package, this new one would be the third one, but the previous one that was done under the previous president hasn't even been spent yet. And then the second one still hasn't been spent yet either, but now they're doing a third one, which goes specifically to bankrupt blue states. Under Sowell's rule, promising things, government spending, the voters, passing on the debt for those yet born, yet voting. And we know from the General Accountability Office, Government Accountability Office, that the unfunded liabilities and IOUs for Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act are total $500,000 each for each person in the United States. So another stimulus, more bankruptcy. Excuse me, I mean more unsustainability. The state can't go bankrupt because they have the monopoly on coercion and the power to tax. Okay, and then another thing that people wrote on the E.org homework was on student loan debt. And I guess there's been a recent article since then about how many, I guess there's a group of students who got together and say, we're not going to pay our student loan debt because it's going to be forgiven anyway. So we learned about Karl Marx and the class struggle. Well, a Hayekian view of the class struggle or classes is that a class is created when you get special treatment under law. For example, the police unions are very, very powerful under the National Labor Relations Board. So the police unions a special treatment under the law. So when they violate people's civil rights, there's a labor union member on the arbitration committee. And in Detroit, the chief of police tried to fire somebody who was abused people's civil rights several times, but was unable to because the labor unions didn't allow that to occur. So that's an example of how the special treatment under law creates classes. So the student, people with college degrees tend to make more money than those that don't have college degrees. So forgiving student loans means that those who make less money pay for those who do, because banks get reimbursed or the federal government just runs up more debt. So where does that come from? Those yet voting, those yet born, and those making less money for forgiving student debt. So this whole idea of bailing out certain people and not everyone, or discretionary intervention, that's called corporatism. Where the state and big business are in bed together, corporatism. And that term was used to describe fascist Italy in the 1930s. So the financial institutions that lend money to students, they borrow it at 2%, getting special treatment through the Federal Reserve Bank, and then they lend it to the students at 7%. Right? So they're making a nice 5% off the top, special treatment under law. And that special treatment under law creates a class of people. Well, so corporatism means that large firms benefit at the expense of small firms. And then when you create this series of special treatments under law, that's called the vested interest. Vested interest. People who don't want to see creative destruction because they're getting above normal profits, because they're prevented from competition or getting special sources of easy money or special trade barriers. Corporatism. So the idea is United States heading towards corporatism? That was a question. Is the United States heading towards corporatism? So the next homework story that people were interested in is about the California labor law. I think it's called AB 5. And again, we're talking about, so and it's also called House Resolution 1. So in California, they passed a law. Let's see, so you have Uber, Lyft, Airbnb. These are all creative destruction of the market, new tech firms. But over here you have taxi unions and hotel unions. So these hotel unions are and the taxi unions, and we should also mention state treasuries. Are the vested interests against this new entrepreneurship or gig economy, the new economy, app economy, because it's hard to organize into labor unions independent contractors. So the elite, the statists, Keynesians, try to constantly pass laws to prevent the independent contractor mode of doing business, because it's hard to organize them, it's hard to tax them, it's hard to regulate them. So they're constantly pushing for more state control over these new firms. And that was California law AB 5, and now it's at a federal level, House Resolution 1. And Fee had an article about that and talked about how a lot of people who like to do gig work, let's say that you're a parent and you want to take care of your child, you don't work 9 to 5, you do gigs, right? Entrepreneurship gigs. And how that's this constant pushing towards corporatism is preventing this entrepreneurial economy from occurring. And we've had a lot of easy money over the last 12, 14 years, and we should have a lot of inflation because of that. But because of this gig economy and improved information and factor mobility, we don't have the inflation as we would expect. So it's all about factor mobility. Oh, and another reason is because if you're an employee instead of an independent contractor, then you do withholding taxes. So the state treasury pushed for the corporatist model because it allows withholding taxes directly from your paycheck. Oh, and we should also mention, well, for example, in New York, the MTA, public transportation, vested interest, because they're also public labor union members. The federal, related to that is the minimum wage is also a form of corporatism. Larger firms can afford it more than smaller firms. Okay. And then if you have more than 50 employees, then you have to buy healthcare insurance. And the Affordable Care Act was written by the healthcare insurance company. Corporatism. The state and big business in bed together. So the question is, how is the MTA involved in this? And the MTA is a government corporation that manages public transportation in the New York metropolitan area, and it's staffed and run by labor union workers. And labor union workers, the median labor union worker makes twice the median American in salaries. And because there's no residuals, there's no profit motive, you get a lot of fraud involved. So MTA is public transportation. Uber and Lyft are competitors to public transportation. So that's why they're a vested interest. And you can privatize it. So the original subway was privately funded and privately built. I've only been living in New York 15 years, but I have friends who older than me who have lived here their whole lives. And they told me that the subway was originally privately built, 3 different subway lines back when Brooklyn was a separate city and Manhattan was a separate city and Queens was a separate city. And then due to the state always wanting to grow its power, then New York City became the 5 counties or the 5 boroughs, and then they took over the subway system. The state took over the subway system. When we say the state, that just means whatever political entity has a legal monopoly on coercion. In this case, we're talking about the city. So the city took over and then immediately doubled the fee for the subway. Did that answer your question? Okay, so continuing on with our fee.org homework assignment review, some people wrote on the effects of the lockdown. So the idea was, I remember when all this was happening, I had 120 students and immediately, boom, we all had to go online, right? And it was billed as you would have 3 weeks of lockdown, and then everyone would get herd immunity, and then back to business. And that's what Sweden did. Sweden didn't have any wear a mask mandate or anything like that. They left it to the individual and the local and decentralized environment to take care of each other. And then in the huge nation states, you have the experts, stability, telling people what to do. And so now it's been almost a year and we're still wearing masks, and there's been 5 or 6 different iterations of the virus. You create a vaccine at a certain moment in time, and no way could it possibly keep up with all the new iterations, but the state never lets a good crisis go to waste, so you let this, so the economic, what happened is we've given up our economic health and prioritized public health, opportunity cost. Whereas Sweden didn't lock down their economy and they allowed some trade-off. And as long as 6 months ago, tens of thousands of public health officials said we're prioritizing public health way too much over economic health. And they said, well, we should open up the economy and take care of the vulnerable instead of everyone, students who are, people who take care of themselves or study or want to learn, don't need to be managed by experts. It's elderly and the sick who we need to worry about it on the public health side. Right, so there's lots of costs of the lockdown. And if you go to my website, CameronEconomics.com, on the index page, you'll see a report from the American Institute of Economists and the National Bureau for Economic Research, who show that the costs in terms of lives due to the destruction of economic health is actually going to be greater than the cost in terms of lives due to the virus. And there's lots of a spike in crime, and there's a spike in mental illness. So there's lots of costs to the lockdowns by allowing experts and stability under utilitarian society where the experts know better than individuals, acting responsibly in a decentralized manner. Right. So the other thing that people wrote about. See, you're of the social media generation, not me. I knew that. I remember when Facebook came out, and I knew that if you're not paying, you are the product, right? So it's all about sharing the big data and everything. And so there was the GameStop, Reddit, and Robinhood, where you had the vested interests, Wall Street, and I guess non-financial specialists, Main Street, are gaming or making a play against people who get the easy money, the special interests who get the easy money. Were betting that GameStop and other firms' value would go down. And so never let a good crisis go to waste. So now the current administration, the Securities Exchange Commission, and I believe even the Department of Justice are asking what happened. Well, nobody really knows what happened unless you were there. So the idea that the SEC and the Department of Justice can know more than those people who are actually in the game, playing it in the market, that's Hayek 1945 knowledge problem. where knowledge problem, where these regulators, by definition, can't know as much as those in the market, so the regulators get captured by those they regulate. And that prevents creative destruction. When you start having regulation, then that prevents creative destruction and keeps the vested interests in power. And we'll be covering the knowledge problem related to regulation quite extensively later, looking at the SEC in particular and the Bernie Madoff case. Great. Any questions, comments, critiques?